Hello.
Hey Jeff, I don't think you're in the agenda yet. Maybe you sent the pull request just then.
Yeah,
Yes, you did.
I'm late. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just looking at the attendees and I was like, it's only TSC members. So welcome.
Thank you.
Lee has made his apologies. He can't make it today. We're waiting on Stephen, who was in the meeting just now, so he should be around, hopefully.
Hi guys.
Hey, Michael. If you
Okay,
fix in that
you're
conflict, I beat you to it.
resolving, but I leave it to you.
I don't know about you, but I use the refined GitHub extension,
Yeah, me too.
and it's great. You just go in and there's merge conflicts. You just like accept both, merge, done. Everything's fixed. Yeah, I love it. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I think you recommended it to me, yeah. But since then I'm using it.
I really like it. I think other than Kuwait, we're all here. So we'll just wait a couple more minutes for Kuwait. Okay, I'm sure Kuwait won't mind if we get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October GraphQL Specification Working Group. By being here, we have all agreed to the specification member agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct, links to all of which can be found in the agenda file. We'll start with an introduction of the attendees. We'll do that in the order that they are in the agenda file. So that'll start with me. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji from GraphQL.
Hey, Rob from First Dibs.
Hello, I'm Matt from Meta.
Hi, I am Stephen.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Jeff.
Lovely. Thank you all. Okay. Ideally, we would have some note takers. Quite a few of the topics today are going to be mine, so I'm not going to be able to do that today, I don't think. Also, we have Rob speaking. So if anyone else is able to volunteer to take notes, that would be much appreciated.
I can take notes for the first 30 minutes. Unfortunately, I will need to drop at the top of the hour.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And yeah, I think we can all muck in a bit as well. It is a shared document. Fantastic. Okay, so reviewing the agenda, I don't think any of the secondary meetings have gone ahead for a while now. Actually, I'm just going to check those agendas and see. yeah, they're not even filed, so those didn't happen. We're going to look at the action items, and then we have a few topics from me and one from Rob. So my topics cover an editorial fix to the coercion table for list, validation that the operation type actually exists as a validation rule rather than waiting for execution to tell us that. Talking about potentially advancing one-of to RFC3 status, and also why we maybe shouldn't do that. And also talking about execute selection set and execute grouped field set. And Rob will be presenting a incremental delivery update. Jeff, is there something in this that you're particularly interested in, since you're only here for half the meeting?
One of is of interest, I think, if that would be acceptable to the group.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. So what I'll do is I'll bring one of up top, and then we'll do the incremental delivery and then cover the other topics, if that's okay with everyone. Sounds good. Okay. Anything else that anyone wants to add to the agenda? No, all good. Okay, in which case we will take a quick, actually, I'm going to skip over the action items because we got quite a lot on today, and I don't think any of them have advanced anyway. So let's talk about one of. So as mentioned in a previous working group, one of is now implemented in GraphQL.js. Oh, welcome, Kwei. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, what?
Just say who you are, where you're from.
Oh yeah, I'm Koi. I'm from Meta. Sorry, I'm late because I'm trying to find a room and I failed to do so, so I'm actually outside of
No
the.
worries. Okay, so continuing on the one-off. So we have an implementation of this in GraphQL.js 16. So people can actually opt into trying this out. There is specification edits, which I thought were final, and hence we come on to the why they're not. Yakov has pointed out that the validation rule that I've added may not actually be necessary. Now, I've not fully analyzed this yet, but essentially what Yakov is saying is that the one-off validation rule is not needed because the values of correct type already cover it if we make a small modification elsewhere in the specification. I was actually hoping to get Lee's input on this, but he's not able to make it today. So I thought I'd just bring it up anyway, let people know that this is one of the things that we are looking at and exploring. If anyone has any feedback, we can discuss that. Otherwise, I think one of will come up again in a future one.
But the validation is needed because like we analyze if theoretically the values more than one value are passed in, or as far as I remember.
Yeah, so essentially there's a lot of different ways of specifying a one-off object. If you do it as a full literal, then it must have exactly one key as the literal. If you do it as a literal object with variables specified for the fields, then still exactly one key should be specified. And you can also specify it just as a variable placeholder for the entire one-off object itself. So I thought that this needed a validation rule, but I think Yakov's actually correct that it doesn't. And we can actually just use two of the existing validation rules to cover it with a slight modification. The challenge being that nothing currently requires that exactly one key is set. And also there's complexities around the variables that can be embedded in a location because one-off requires that they are non-nullable when they're specified as a one-off key. But I think Yakov is effectively proposing that is variable usage allowed rule is updated with one-off specifics. And then we can just rely on the, I think it's values of correct type to cover.
But isn't that an implementation detail? And in a spec, it's much clearer to have it as a rule defined?
Maybe. I think it's clear with its own validation rule, but Yakov's point, I think, is a good one, which is that people, if they implement the other two rules correctly, then this additional rule that we've introduced shouldn't need to do anything.
Okay.
So we're effectively telling people to implement something with no benefit. I haven't fully evaluated this myself yet, so I haven't thought of if there's any edge cases that Yakov's proposal doesn't cover. So if anyone wants to do that, that would be fantastic. But that is one reason not to advance one of, because there's still a little question around that right now.
Yeah, I also have to read up on that.
Would it be a breaking spec change if we introduced the rule and then in a later revision said this rule is redundant and merged and like removed it? I don't think so, right? So we probably, this is good. That means we can probably just, whichever path feels right, just go for it and then like iterate on a small bit on the validation if needed.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable to me. I think removing a validation rule is not a breaking change.
Yeah, then
But
let's
adding
go
one
and
might be. So it might be better to start with the validation rule.
Yeah.
Even if even if it could end up being redundant.
Because the spec as is working, and we have more than just the GraphQL JS implementation. Like there are lots of people who implemented it. So we could advance it and then iterate.
We certainly could do. I don't think there's any massive rush to push this to RFC 3. I mean, it's essentially ready. This is all just like final editorial, really. So I'm happy to spend a little bit more time thinking about this. But yeah, I'm in general agreement. It would be fine either way, probably. And we can change it later if we need to. Okay, recognizing that we've got a packed schedule, let's move on. Rob, would you like to give us an update on incremental delivery?
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so been working with Yakov over pretty much the past year or so. We had yeah, so we started out on this new response format that I think there was a general consensus on in June of 2023. I recommend everyone review this discussion thread at the top of the spec draft to refresh your memory if you need to. But basically, this is the version of incremental delivery that doesn't have duplication of fields in defer when you have fields that are shared between deferred fragments or inside a deferred fragment and a non-deferred fragment. The implementation of this is in GraphQL JS, the latest alpha version 17. And we now have a spec draft that we want to start getting eyes on. So it's a big PR, unfortunately. It's a big change. So I guess this is kind of like an introduction to where I want to start going. So we would be great if you have time, start looking at this, start giving early feedback. What I would like to do, probably starting at the next meeting, is break this down into some kind of integration branch and do smaller PRs, and where we could, as a group, hopefully review section by section to not be overwhelming. So yeah, I just kind of want to get thoughts on that approach in general. I'm thinking that probably like the first thing that we'll look at is the response section. So this is like not covering any algorithms yet, but this will like describe what the response looks like uh with these examples in mind. And yeah, we can start iterating. If that looks good, then we can start moving on to parts of the algorithm bit by bit. Benji, are you muted? Is it just
Thank
me
you.
or?
This is great. Yes, I think doing the way that you propose sounds reasonable. I know there's also some changes like the replace execute selection set that can be pulled out. I think that the current implementation is still based on that change.
Yes, it is. So I'm really glad that you are bringing that up later in this meeting.
Perfect. If there's any other things like that that can be pulled out that are separate standalone changes, refactoring, things like that, that we can just merge actually into the spec rather than into the integration branch, anything that we can do to get the total size of this actual entire spec pull request smaller, I think would be really beneficial. But yeah, I think that the general approach that you propose would be wise. I think you did a pretty good summary of how everything works in your talk at GraphQL Conf. Would that be good viewing for anyone who's not up to date on the current proposal, do you think, or have things moved on
definitely.
a bit?
That's definitely in line with what is in here. That was kind of like my intention of the talk, is like to have that as a thing that people could watch when reviewing this. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I'd effectively assign that as homework for everyone to have a watch of that talk.
Yeah.
Rob, a quick question for you. So I understand that we're going to start with the response format, and I just quickly, like when I skimmed through it, I saw that you were, is it intentional that it's the same, like we're gonna review the response format with the context that it's both applicable for defer and stream, or are we going to kind of also break that down, like response format for just defer, and then like later on, like it will be mostly duplicated, but there will be addition for stream?
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. This PR stream is still a work in progress on it. The response format, though, that section is covering for both defer and stream. It's they are mostly the same. Where there's differences, that's noted in the response section. But the algorithms for stream are still incoming, but I think that is a good thing to review separately. So we got a bit of ways to get before we get to that.
Okay.
But yeah,
I
does that make
guess
sense?
maybe okay. My suggestion, and not a strong suggestion, is like, would it be easier if we just review this response format with only thinking about defer? Because like I have a feeling maybe because the stream's algorithm is not set, maybe that will also change the response format in the future. What's your thoughts?
I don't think that we're planning to change the stream response format.
Okay.
It assuming that like there aren't any other suggestions that come up.
Okay.
It's just what we're working on is just exactly like how the algorithm is implemented. and it is implemented already in GraphQL JS. It's there. And yeah, like another good resource is there's a ton of unit tests in GraphQL JS too, that are helpful. But yeah, it's just like the still just still working on the algorithm for Stream.
All right, thanks.
And I do expect that to be smaller. It's not going to be another diff the size of this. It's just going to be a bit additive on top of it.
Fantastic. So is there, other than having people look at it, is there any other asks that you have, or any points that any concerns?
Yeah, I would guess, I would say review the talk. I'll add a link back to the agenda for the talk. Review the examples that are in the discussion thread that are also linked. And if you have concerns about the general response format from the examples, let me know. Otherwise, my plan for next month is to try to get like an integration branch set up with a PR against that only has the response changes, so we can review that as a group.
Perfect. That sounds great. So just because we're chopping and changing the agenda around, let's jump to the final agenda item, which actually relates to this, and that's the replacing selection set with execute grouped field set. So this is something that came out of a few different approaches to stream and defer. Both, like, I think Yakov's done 2 or 3 different approaches to stream and defer. I think Rob's done one, and I've also taken a punt at writing what I would have written as well, which isn't a finished version or anything, but all of them needed something along these lines. And since then, it's also turned out that the fragment arguments pull request also would benefit from this refactoring. So essentially, this is just refactoring of the GraphQL specification by changing where we currently talk about executing a selection set. What we actually typically do is we take a selection set and we turn it into a grouped field set, and then we execute that. And this particularly is important when it comes to field collection, because you're actually merging multiple selection sets across multiple different branches. So strictly executing the grouped field set is more accurately what we do, and actually reflects what we do in GraphQL JS as well. So this is, I think, a fairly clean re-implementation or rewriting of this. And one of the things that you may notice is that the execute query, execute mutation, and execute subscription event algorithms have all been simplified, because the steps that were used to execute the selection set and handle that can now all be extracted to one common algorithm, which is good. Like, don't repeat yourself. And also it simplifies the algorithm around what was merge selection sets becomes now collect subfields. That is my main concern in this, is purely the word subfields. Is that the correct word? Is that the word we want? But other than that, I think that this pull request is basically good to go. So it's just naming things. Yeah, so feedback on this would be appreciated. And also this will help these other pull requests to go through with smaller diffs.
I like the name, but it might be because I'm pretty familiar with GraphQL JS, and that's the name that I've been seeing there for as long as I've been looking at that code. I would guess that probably other implementations, if they were based on GraphQL JS, might be using the same name, but I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, having a default of hey, it's named in GraphQL JS, that's a really good argument. But it might be closer to collect selections because it's like you collect subfields is going through each selection in the field selection set. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's not terrible. I'm in favor of moving forward with it if the name is like reasonable enough.
It's subfields because it's not used for like the top level fields, only like everything one level underneath that. That's right, is it?
It is, yeah, I think that's essentially it.
But
I think that the fields, if I'm remembering this correctly, and it's been a while since I wrote it, like I think possibly over a year, I think that fields itself is a collection of field selections that all represent the same named field. So yeah, it's collecting the fields that this field has as its selections. So
is
yeah, I think
execute not wrong in this case?
no, the executes in a different section to the subfields, and we are executing that group field set.
Yeah, the only thing that might be nice is we've merged the merge fields or merge selections, or merge selection sets into collect subfields. So it might be nice to call it collect and merge subfields, just like to make clear that we're like there is a cost, there's like a recursive cost to this. It's not you're not just doing it one layer deep. But that's like a very nitpicky thing.
Yeah, it's a good call though. I think itself might not be recursive. I think it calls collect fields, which is then recursive, but collect subfields itself is not. But yeah, I think also what you were saying before about it being selections, I think is an important thing. So you could think of it more as a collect field selections, but it would need to be clear that they're the selections from inside of the field rather than the selections of the field, which again, naming. So if anyone's got decent suggestions for alternative algorithm names, please submit them as comments on the pull request. Also, having a look over this would be much appreciated. Maybe putting some approves on it would be good as well. Because yeah, again, multiple other pull requests would be simpler with this change in place.
Yeah, collect subfields is not recursive. It returns the list of it returns the grouped fields, which then in the next step of your algorithm, they're executed, and that's the part that it's recursive. That's recursive.
Do implementers need a sort of a non-normative note about this, like a recommendation to update the logic within their implementations to use these naming conventions? Or is that sort of implicit or even not needed? Should they match these naming conventions currently?
I don't think, go on.
Oh yeah, I think we make it clear, I think in like the intro of the spec, that any algorithm is like a one that is correct, but any implementation can do anything so long as the results are the same.
Okay.
So analyzing this and making sure that I'm not concretely changing the behavior of GraphQL would be appreciated. But I'm pretty sure that it just does what it did before, just in a slightly different definition of the algorithm. I think that this actually does more closely reflect what GraphQL.js does internally anyway. So for implementations that are based on GraphQL.js, they probably already have these changes in place. This spec change comes much later than the actual implementation change in GraphQL.js. Okay, I'll move us on. All right, let's have a look at the first topic, fixed coercion table for lists. This was, I think, raised as an issue a long while ago. I don't even remember whether it was me that spotted it or not, but I didn't put notes on that. And essentially, the spec is wrong, I believe. The table in the spec, and keep in mind that tables in the spec are explicitly non-normative. So if there's a conflict between a table in the spec and the actual algorithm text, then the algorithm text wins. And I believe that the way that we have specified how a doubly nested list of int is defined would mean that if you feed it the list of 1, 2, 3, what will actually happen is it will say, yes, this first layer is a list. Then it will look at 1 and say, this should be a list of int. It's not a list of int, so I'll coerce it to be a list of int. And it would then effectively, the output would be a list of the list 1, the list of 2, and the list of 3. And our table says that's not what happens, but I believe that the table is wrong. And in fact, I've verified this with GraphQL.js, and GraphQL.js agrees with my spec changes. So I believe this is a bug in the spec in that table. So I fixed it and added a few other examples to make it clearer. So I think that this is an editorial change, just a bug fix. It would be great to get it in. Does anyone have any feedback?
Yeah, if this is the way that the reference implementation has always worked, then yeah, I agree. Probably the bugs in the spec, and unless there's a convincing argument that it actually should be the way it is in the table.
I think there is. I think the argument for the way it is in the table is like we probably should have given an example with like the first one being a list of number and the second one not. And that maybe is like a bit nonsensical. But like but on the other hand, if that's how if we always expect to coerce single elements into a list of single element, then that's like, this is probably bad. Like, don't write this, but
I can definitely add that as an example to the coercion table as well, where one of the entries is a list. I think that it would be exactly the same. So if you did list of 1, 2, 3, then it would still end up with list of 1, list of 2, list of 3.
And hopefully list of 1, 2, 3 would also, or
Yes.
like in any, if the list is in any position, it'll,
yeah. I think each of the elements are treated independently and they're coerced independently.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So then this makes sense as fixing the bug in the spec.
Okay, and I have got in there an example of GraphQL JS code that you can run for yourself. So if you think there's a bug in my logic, by all means, point it out in the code. Stephen, would you about to say something?
Well, another point in favor of fixing the spec is that, there's two paths to realign the implementation and the spec. One is this, the other is fixing the implementation, but fixing the implementation is a breaking change. This is not.
And also, to be clear, the algorithms in the spec describe this behavior. So if we were to change it to match the table, we'd have to rewrite the algorithms, which would definitely be a breaking change. Okay, cool. Well, some plus ones on that would be much appreciated, and then we can get it closer to being merged. But I think it's a simple editorial change, to be honest. So by all means, go and do your own validations, go and do your own little scan of the relevant coercion text in the spec and make sure that my interpretation of it is correct. But I think it's good to go, and we should probably have merged it a year ago. Okay. All right, here's a new one. Validate that an operation type exists. So this is one I'm representing on behalf of Shane. Shane has pointed out that if you submit a mutation operation to a schema that does not have a mutation operation, that does not fail validation. It comes out during execution that, oh, there's no mutation type, so we have to stop. But it's not a validation error. And I think that, I may be wrong on this, but I think that actually means you can send any arbitrary mutation document. The fields don't have to exist or anything. It just literally doesn't bother doing anything. I don't really know. But Shane has effectively submitted a fix to this. That is just adding a new validation rule that says if you say a mutation operation, then the mutation operation must be supported. Simple as that. To show that this also is something that is problematic in GraphQL JS, I have also submitted a GraphQL JS code sample that, again, you can run for yourselves to validate that this is the case. Michael. Oh, sorry, I thought you put your hand up to say something. So I moved that we move this to RFC1. I'm going to remind myself what the requirements are for RFC1. They're defined in the spec repo in the contributing guide, I think. Yeah, so the straw man is just surfacing the problem. Stage 1 proposal has an identified champion, which in this case is Shane, with support from me. A clear explanation of the problem and the solution, which I believe we have. Illustrative examples, I mean, simple enough to illustrate. Incomplete spec edits, I think we've got that. And identification of potential concerns, challenges, and drawbacks. So does anyone want to surface any of those?
Benji, I actually have a question, if you will. So my understanding is I don't think that in the schema, the root field types, they're just represented as like type query or type mutation and type subscription, if you will, right? They're not like specifically marked as root field. So if I'm reading the changes, it's basically trying to add a new validation section just for your operation level. I guess I'm just thinking like, shouldn't the existing validation should have caught this? I didn't understand why we didn't catch this, and I guess that's where I'm a little confused. Yeah.
So that's not exactly, that's not perfectly correct. So yes, query, mutation, subscription, they are object types, just like any other object type. But we do have a schema concept, and the schema then has the root types where we actually name it. So in GraphQL.js, for example, you would say new GraphQL schema, query is the query type. And what that means is that your actual operation types don't have to be called query, mutation, and subscription. They could be called root, changes, and real time. That would be totally fine as well. So we do have a concept that these are specific things that relate to those specific operations. So I think it is okay. That said, yes, why didn't we catch this before? It seems fairly obvious, but we didn't. And it is caught at runtime, so it's not like a major deal. Just if someone tried to issue this query, it would bail out right at the very beginning. So it's not exactly costly or anything. It's just a minor oversight, I think.
Yeah, I think we might internally have never caught it because in order to even parse the document, we end up like needing that instance of a mutation or subscription. So we end up, I think, like the relay IR, the relay Rust stuff that parses things, I think actually fails. So it's a pre-validation failure for us.
Yeah, it makes sense. Any tooling that tries to parse the tree is going to fail. So this is kind of already getting validated, even though it's not in the spec.
Yeah, and that's why I wouldn't be surprised that like this, we didn't come up with the validation rule, but yes, the validation rule being part of the spec is correct.
Okay, so I think I move that we move this to RC1. If you are in agreement, can one of the TSC members here please do that? Excellent. And I think that actually, in a very roundabout kind of way, brings us to the end of our agenda. Is there anything that people would like to revisit, discuss deeper, or any other items that need to be discussed? No? Okay, fantastic. Well, in which case, I'll give you the rest of the hour back and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.